Atheists aren't easy people to please. They demand hard evidence of God's existence. And I get that. Revelation without evidence is worthless. With that said, let's explore the complex interplay between mankind's curated arrogance and fallibility. Nowhere is this pairing more self-evident than in the insidious pathology that underpins the atheist belief: nihilism. The idea that there is no God, and thus no higher power than naturalistic man, and thus no design, meaning, or purpose to life. Full disclosure: I come from a strictly agnostic background, where over the course of time I fell into misanthropy, and that led me along a path to full-blown nihilism. A path that came within a hair's width of killing me. So you could say that I'm somewhat qualified to address this issue. Consequently, I'm confident in asserting that atheism only leads to destruction. That isn't a matter of personal opinion, but of lived experience. Now, my intention isn't to insult anybody's intelligence. This isn't a character assassination. I'm just pointing out the obvious flaws in the ideology. You're free to take it or leave it. What would you say is an atheist's primary motivator? Is it an earnest quest for the truth, or a misplaced sense of loyalty to academia, where the predominant theory is that we're just stardust, floating in an endless vacuum, without any rhyme or reason? The atheist view is that atheism is the most logical stance to take, based on the evidence, which is supplied by and often only viewed through the limited scope of academia. But is that really what most atheists subscribe to? Are they truly as objective and scholarly as they portray themselves? Are they truly committed to atheism? For the more nihilistic atheist, the answer is a resounding no. Their stance isn't logical. It's spiritual. Out of one side of the mouth, these nihilist thinkers make grand claims of impartiality. They say, there is no evidence that God exists, and that's why I'm an atheist. But out of the other side of the mouth, they say, I don't want or need God. An admission that destroys their credibility and nullifies any scholarly stance that they claim to take. Because they're explicitly telling you that they don't reject God based on any particular merit, but on their subjective principles. Curiously, most atheists tend to support the idea that the hypothetical universe is governed by an abstract form of consciousness, which they label natural law, like such as would be pushed in the New Age movement. What the vast majority of atheists truly protest, and don't want to be convinced of, is the existence of a personal God, because by implication, if they were to acknowledge that a personal God exists, then they would be accountable to it, and the golden age of honoring themselves would come to an abrupt end. And, unfortunately, many atheists who do earnestly seek evidence of a personal God demonstrate that the God that we have isn't enough for them. Our God is too big to fully comprehend. But these atheists seek evidence of a God that's small enough for them to understand, but not big enough for them to worship, and that's why they lose themselves in vain philosophy and speak in riddles. Just like the more nihilistic atheists, the simplicity of the truth doesn't provide adequate nourishment for the insatiable appetites of their often very high intellects. Essentially, the vast majority of atheists are dogs chasing their own tails, seeking for seeking's sake. But what's the point of endlessly seeking answers if you're committed to rejecting evidence that contradicts your viewpoint? It just proves that some people don't really want the truth. They just want reassurance that what they believe is the truth. And what sort of logic is that? Even if we view religiosity from a purely mechanical perspective, as atheists do, and assume that all religious people are simply deluding themselves because it makes them happy, well, who cares? Why shouldn't we delude ourselves if everything is meaningless, and babies are condemned from birth? That's the atheist view, or so they claim. That isn't why we're happy. Just so we're clear, Jesus is our source of happiness. The fact that atheists even think to protest religiosity proves that there is merit to seeking meaning. If just one person could demonstrate that they found meaning in their life, even if they derived meaning from a personal quest to prove that there's no meaning to be found in life, that would prove that there's meaning to be sought, and thus life is not meaningless. And if life isn't meaningless, then we must have a purpose for being here. Now, the go-to atheist rebuttal is to maintain that our concept of morality has gradually adapted to our societal needs over time, And as a Christian, my response to that is, so what? Society is the issue, not the standard of morality. Man's sense of right and wrong fluctuates on a daily basis. He only respects the standard when it suits him, which only necessitates the existence of something bigger than ourselves, that is able and willing to govern us with the fairness and responsibility that we're in sorely short supply of. You have to reconcile the fact that we even have morality to some sort of attributive source, and so-called human evolution doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Man's nature proves that we desperately need God, and the existence of morality through the ages demonstrates his influence over man. Would it be reasonable to conclude that this hypothetical higher power would decree that we waste our lives languishing in nihilism, dwelling on self-defeating prophecies, squabbling over ideological differences, and chasing short-lived dopamine fixes? Of course not. But that's what we do. We distract ourselves with endless nonsense because we think our standards are better than the standard bearers. If that were true, then we'd all be infinitely happy in our disobedience. But that isn't the case. Only the opposite is true, because we have strayed from the path. Millions upon millions of people feel miserable and unfulfilled, not because life has no meaning, but because they're pursuing things that have no meaning, that don't nourish their souls, and that warps their perception of reality. And yet they choose to persevere. Are they gluttons for punishment, or are they being driven to pursue something bigger than themselves? Sounds an awful lot like purpose, doesn't it? And this really is the crux of the issue. People are seeking the correct things. They're just looking in the wrong places. The fact that we even seek things like hope, love, truth, logic, and justice not only proves that meaning and purpose exist, but there's also merit to seeking them. Seeking vindicates the seeker. The question isn't should we seek, but are we seeking the right things in the right places? We search tirelessly for reasons to live, not because life is some frivolous thing, but because life is a beautiful gift, and it's our natural instinct to want to make the best of it. Even from within the void, nihilist thinkers nod their heads in agreement. They say things like, "You only get one shot at life, so live it." Does that not prove that they're searching for more? If they weren't, they wouldn't be here. As coarse as it sounds, suicide is the only logical conclusion to nihilism. The only true nihilist is a dead nihilist. Just ask the novelist Ernest Hemingway, whose life perfectly embodied the destructive effects of nihilism. In one quote, he said, "Worry a little bit every day, and in a lifetime you will lose a couple of years." Wise words, but if Ernest had spent a little time worrying about the important things, then maybe he wouldn't have been a lifelong alcoholic who died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Thankfully, most nihilists never fully commit, because clearly, they instinctively realize that the only logical conclusion to be drawn is that we are here for a reason. And our purpose is to find out what that reason is. So what is the reason? Are we really here just to exist as highly evolved primates? To conquer the stars? Find habitable planets? And repeat the process over and over and over? Seriously, what would be the point of that? It isn't about rocket ships or pharmacology or who can build the tallest skyscraper. These things don't reveal our potential. They smother it. We're here to think small, think local, to form bonds and be fruitful, to raise families and live free, happy, and simple lives, in accordance with God's flawless will. We're here to simply exist. That's literally it. That's our purpose. Does that sound meaningless to you?